Montana Territory, 1879. The wind carried dust and silence across the edge of Elk Hollow, where the pines thinned and the land barrens reach stretched longer than the shadows. She was tied to a tree. Brielle Ellory's wrists were raw where the rope bit into her skin, her dress torn, her dark hair matted with dirt and pine needles. The sun beat down hard, but she kept her chin high. Her lips were split, her cheek bruised, but her eyes, those stayed steady. Not a tear, not a word. "You should have said yes," Garvey Holt muttered, spitting tobacco near her boots. He was a tall man, full of money and meanness, with lawmen in his pocket and fear working for him like hired hands. Garvey had offered her marriage, not for love, just for land. Her father's land, left to her after he passed last winter. 300 acres of thick timber, river-fed pasture, and a house built by her grandfather's bare hands. Garvey wanted it for his cattle empire. She had said no. So he had her dragged from her porch and tied to a pine tree at the edge of town. "She'll beg before sundown," one of his men chuckled as they mounted up and rode off. But Brielle didn't beg. She didn't make a sound. It was nearly dusk when hooves sounded again, slow and steady, not like the usual hurry of ranch hands or lawmen. One horse. A man dismounted. He was tall, sun-browned, and broad through the shoulders. His hat shaded sharp cheekbones and a jaw that looked like it had clenched through more fights than words. Dust coated his boots and coat, and a rifle was slung over his saddle. He did not blink when he saw her. He walked right up to her, knelt, and pulled a knife from his belt. She flinched. "I ain't going to hurt you," he said, voice low and steady. "Name's Xander Kade. You all right?" She looked at him for a long second. Her lips opened, but her voice came out hoarse. "I am now." He cut the ropes in 2 swift motions. She stumbled, knees buckling, and he caught her before she hit the ground. His arms were strong, warm from the sun, and she let herself lean into him for a breath. "Let me take you home," he said. "I will not leave my land." He nodded once. "Then I will stay." Her house sat quiet beneath the cottonwoods. He helped her inside, gave her water, washed her hands and face. He did not ask questions, not yet. He just sat by the fire with her, shirt sleeves rolled up, one hand around a tin cup. She watched him in the flicker of the flame. "You knew who did it?" he asked. "Garvey Holt," she said. "He wants this land. He thinks if he scares me enough, I will sign it over." "Will you?" Her eyes lit with fury. "I would rather die tied to that tree." He grinned, not unkind. "Good." She blinked. "Good. Because now he has a problem." She tilted her head. "What problem?" Xander stood, walked to the door. He looked out into the gathering dark. "You." Then he turned. "And me." The next morning, Garvey Holt came back. He brought 3 men. They rode up to the porch like they owned it. Brielle stepped onto that porch with her spine straight and her shotgun loaded. But it was Xander who stepped in front of her. Garvey's eyes narrowed. "Who in hell are you?" Xander's voice was calm. "I am her man." Garvey laughed. "Since when?" Xander's hand rested on the handle of his Colt. "Since now." Garvey's smile faded. "You think that means something?" Xander's tone never wavered. "It does to me." Then he said it. "Clear as the Montana sky. That's my bride now." Brielle's breath caught. Her heart slammed in her chest. She looked up at him, and he looked back at her steady, sure, like he meant every word. She did not speak. But she did not deny him either. Garvey's mouth twisted. "You really think this bluff will hold?" Xander stepped down from the porch. "I think if you ride 10 more feet toward this house, I will drop you where you sit." And Garvey believed him. They rode off. Furious. But they left. Brielle did not move for a long time. Then she turned to Xander. "You said that like you meant it." "I did. You do not even know me." "I know enough." She looked at him long and hard. "And what is that?" He took 1 step closer, slow and careful, like she was something sacred. I know you did not break. I know you would not beg. I know you stayed standing when most would have folded. That is enough for me." Her voice was barely a whisper. "That is not how people fall in love." He smiled, soft and real. "It is how I did." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, but she did not look away. That night he slept in the barn. She watched the flicker of the lantern through the window, heart thudding. By morning she brought him coffee. He took it from her hands gently, like it meant more than it should, and maybe it did. 3 days passed. He stayed close, fixed her porch steps, patched the barn roof, chopped firewood, but he never pushed, never asked for more than what she gave. She found herself watching him, how he moved, how he listened, how he said more with silence than most men said with 100 words. On the 4th night she stood on the porch and said, "You can sleep inside." He did not pretend to misunderstand. "Are you sure?" "Yes." He followed her in. She set up a pallet by the fire. They sat side by side on the floor for a long time, neither speaking. Then she said softly, "You meant it, did you not? What you said, that I was your bride?" "Yes. You barely knew me." "I had seen enough." She looked at him. "Then I want to know you." He turned to her. "You will," and she believed him. Outside, the wind shifted. Inside, the fire burned slow and warm. And for the first time since her father died, Brielle felt safe. Not because she had a gun, but because she had him. The days that followed pulled autumn into the valley, gold through the aspens, frost on the rail posts come morning. The river behind the house moved slower, its banks lined in brittle grass. Xander rose early, always before her, but never noisily. She'd find the stove lit, her woodpile taller, her barn swept and orderly. He worked without asking and never treated her like something fragile. That stayed with her. One afternoon she stood at the edge of the north pasture, arms folded, watching him mend the fence near the hollow where the deer passed. He moved with purpose, hands firm but not rushed, like the work mattered because it was hers. When he spotted her, he didn't wave or call out. He just lifted his chin slightly, an acknowledgement, before returning to the task. Later, she brought down a tin of cornbread and a jar of last year's plum preserves. "I thought you might want something decent," she said, handing it over. He accepted it without fanfare, but his eyes held hers longer than they needed to. "Did you make this?" he asked. "I did," she said. He opened the jar, dipped a finger into the preserves, and tasted it. "Best I've had in years." She didn't smile, but something eased in her brow. "You've had better." "I've had more expensive," he said, "but not better." She sat on a low stump and watched the wind tug at the grass. "You know horses?" she asked after a while. "Well enough." "The one in the south stall's got a cough." "Been off oats since the cold settled in." He rose, brushing his hands on his thighs. "Let me take a look." Inside the barn, he moved quiet, slow, touching the gelding's neck, checking its gums, listening to the lungs. She leaned against the stall door, arms crossed. "He yours?" he asked. "He was my father's." He didn't ask more, just nodded and stepped out. "Could be lung fever," he said. "Needs warmth, rest, and some mash with molasses." "I can help mix it." "I've got molasses in the pantry. I'll fetch it." She watched him disappear toward the house, his steps steady, boots crunching dry leaves. When he returned, they worked side by side in the feed room. The air smelled of hay, iron, and sugar. Her hand brushed his once as they stirred, and neither pulled away. "Where'd you learn horses?" she asked. "Texas, mostly. My uncle ran a remount station near Waco." "You grew up there?" "Some years. Others I was further west. Colorado Territory, then down near Mesilla." She paused. "You ran cattle, drove them, fought for them, lost some." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. That night, after the fire burned low, she sat by the window, sewing the hem of a curtain that had frayed in the wind. Xander sat nearby, whittling a small block of wood into something shapeless but studied. "What was your mother like?" she asked suddenly. His hands paused. "Quiet, steady." "Is that where you get it?" He didn't answer right away. "Maybe. She was a Comanche woman before she was anything else. Married my father when she was 17. He died in Kansas when I was a boy. She never remarried." Brielle set her needle down. "You have her eyes," she said. He looked over, startled. "How would you know? They're the kind that see more than they say." He didn't look away. "You haven't asked me what I plan to do about Garvey," she said. "I figure you already know." "I do." He nodded once. "Then tell me where I stand." She took a slow breath, folded her sewing neatly beside her. "You said I was your bride." "I did. I need to know if you meant that as protection or promise." "I meant it as both." She rose, walked to where he sat, and knelt beside him. The fire cast her face in copper and shadow. "If you stay," she said, voice low, "you're not just standing between me and Garvey. You're choosing a life that'll be watched, questioned, maybe even hunted. I've lived worse." "I haven't." He reached out then, slow, and touched her cheek with the back of his fingers. "Then I'll teach you how to live through it." She closed her eyes for a breath, then opened them. "Then we'll do it together." Outside, the wind picked up, brushing past the eaves like a whisper. Inside, nothing rushed. Nothing needed to. The fire held steady, and so did they. The first frost held through morning, silvering the earth and glazing the porch railings in a thin coat of ice. Xander stood at the edge of the pasture, his breath visible, watching a hawk circle above the ridge. From the house, Brielle stepped out with a wool blanket wrapped over her shoulders and a tin of warm biscuits in her hand. "You always this still before breakfast?" she asked. He glanced over his shoulder. "Only when I'm waiting to see if something's coming." She came to stand beside him. "You expect someone." "I expect Garvey's pride won't let him walk away quiet." She passed him the tin. "Then we plan while it's quiet." They ate in silence, feet pressed into the stiff grass, eyes on the tree line. When the sun cleared the slope, they returned to the house. She lit the fire in the stove while he poured water into the basin near the barn door, rinsing the ash from his hands. That day, he followed her into the root cellar and helped haul up sacks of dried beans and the last of the onions. She didn't ask him to, and he didn't comment on the weight. In the afternoon, she brought out a map her father kept, edges frayed, folds worn thin. She spread it across the kitchen table and pointed to a spot south of the property line. "There's a spring here, fed by runoff from the North Ridge. Garvey wants it more than anything else. The cattle won't keep without steady water through the dry season." Xander studied the map. "How far's the fence from the spring?" 30 yards. My father never moved it closer. Said some things ought to stay shared." "He wasn't wrong," Xander said. "But Garvey doesn't think that way." She traced the line with her finger. "He wants to claim it, then say I trespassed." Xander folded the map again, careful with the creases. "Then we're going to mark every post before first snow. You'll have proof of the line and a witness to place it." She met his eyes. "You'd stand as witness." "I already have." That evening she brought out a tin box from under the floorboards inside, a stack of letters tied with blue thread, a deed, and a photograph of her parents taken outside the same house they now stood in. She didn't hand him the photo, only set it gently on the table as she unfolded the deed. "My father never trusted the courthouse," she said. "He recorded everything himself, kept copies in triplicate. There's one buried under the hearthstone and another with Reverend Cal in town." Xander leaned on the table, scanning the signature. "That'll hold." She lifted the photograph and looked at it for a long time. "My mother died when I was 8. He raised me with one good hand and a back full of pain, but he never once asked me to leave." Xander waited, giving her the space between words. He said I came from land and fire, that I'd outlast any man who tried to break me. You did, Xander said. She set the photo down, face down this time. He didn't reach for her, but she stepped closer anyway. I don't believe in quick things, she said. Not joy, not trust, not love. I don't ask you to, he said, but I believe in what's built slow. He nodded. So do I. She looked up at him, and when she stepped into his arms, it wasn't out of fear or need. It was quiet, certain, like wind moving through pine. That night they slept in the same room, not out of haste, but because the house didn't feel divided anymore. He lay on the floor beside her bed, his hand resting against the edge, close enough to feel warmth in the dark. Her voice reached him. When did you know that I loved you? He asked. She didn't answer, but he felt her waiting. When you washed the blood from your temple with one hand and buttoned your coat with the other. He heard the small exhale she gave, like surprise wrapped in something softer. I knew when you fixed the fence, she said. You didn't ask where the hammer was. You just found it. Morning came with sleet tapping the windows. The fields turned pale with ice. Before breakfast, she handed him a coat that had belonged to her father, too broad in the shoulders for her, but it fit Xander like it had been waiting for him. There's a surveyor in Hamilton, she said. He'll sign off if we show him evidence. We'll ride in 2 days, Xander said. Weather should break. She nodded, then stepped up, rising on her toes to press her lips to his cheek. I'm not afraid, she said. You don't have to be, he replied. Outside, the land waited silent, watching, ready. The road to Hamilton was choked with wet clay and yellow leaves, the wagon wheels dragging slow behind the bay gelding. Xander drove the team while Brielle sat beside him, a folded oilskin bundle across her lap. The deed. The landmarker list. A letter of witness from Reverend Cal. She hadn't spoken since they crossed the second creek, where the water ran high from recent thaw. Xander glanced her way. You've been quiet all morning. I'm thinking, she said. About Garvey. No, about the courthouse. And what it'll cost to be seen. He didn't ask what she meant. The answer was already in the tension of her shoulders and the way she kept her chin lifted around strangers. At the edge of Hamilton, children ran barefoot through the mud and dogs barked beneath the boardwalks. The surveyor's office was tucked behind the mercantile, its door hung crooked and paint curled with age. Brielle stepped down first, her boots landing in the shallow muck with a soft splatter. She didn't wait for Xander. Inside, the room smelled of coal smoke and old paper. A man with a pinched brow and glasses resting halfway down his nose looked up from a ledger. Need a boundary witness, she said. The man blinked. Name, Brielle Ellory. My father was Thomas Ellory. At the sound of the name, the clerk's expression shifted, not to recognition, but calculation. Xander stepped up behind her, close enough to anchor, not crowd. We brought the deed, he said, and the list of posts, 31 total, placed by her father, maintained yearly. The clerk took the papers, thumbed through them, then looked up. You'll need 2 witnesses if you're challenging a claim. We're not challenging, Brielle said. We're affirming. The man scratched his beard. Still, county law's clear. Second witness has to be non-familial, unaffiliated. She didn't hesitate. Then we'll ride back. Reverend Cal can sign. The clerk gave a shrug. Suit yourself. Back outside, the wind had picked up, snapping the oilskin in her arms. Xander adjusted his coat collar. You sure about Cal? He asked. He signed the will. He knew my father longer than most men in this county. They mounted up and turned back toward the valley. The ride was colder now, sleet threading down from the gray sky. They didn't speak until the trees returned, taller here, closing around them like old sentries. Brielle broke the quiet. What's the farthest you ever traveled? Santa Fe, he said. Winter of '69. What was it like? Dry, loud. A place where no one asked what you left behind. She nodded once. Would you go back? No, why not? His voice came softer this time. Because nothing I want is there. She looked straight ahead, but her fingers curled over the edge of the bench. They reached the homestead before dusk. The house stood quiet, smoke curling from the chimney. Inside, she set the papers on the table, then lit the lamps one by one. Xander removed his coat, hung it by the door, and moved to stoke the fire. She watched him in the pale light, then stepped closer. "I've been thinking," she said. He straightened, turning to face her. "If we're going to take this to court and your name's already tied to mine in town, I'd rather it be true." He didn't speak right away. His gaze held hers, searching, not doubting. "You mean legal," he said. "I mean honest," she said. "No more pretending." He stepped forward, slow as always. "I'd stand before God and every man in this territory for you," he said. "But I won't do it unless you want it." "I want it," she said. "I want to wake up knowing the man beside me isn't just protecting the land. He's mine." His hand rose, brushing a strand of hair from her temple. "Then we'll ride to Reverend Cal tomorrow." She nodded once. "First light." He leaned in, and when his forehead touched hers, she closed her eyes. They stood that way until the fire cracked. Later, she brought out a quilt from the cedar chest, one her mother had sewn when she was young. She laid it on the bed without explanation. When he came to her, they didn't rush. They undressed slowly, hands steady, eyes never leaving one another. When they lay together, it wasn't to fill silence. It was to find something in it. Outside, the sleet turned to snow. Inside, they slept close, warm beneath the quilt, the fire burning down to soft embers. In the morning, they would ride to town and speak vows that had already been lived. But tonight, they slept in a house no longer divided, and every corner of it felt like home. The sun barely cleared the ridge when they reached Reverend Cal's house, a modest white structure with smoke trailing from the stovepipe and frost still clinging to the window panes. The old man opened the door in his shirt sleeves, spectacles perched crooked on his nose, and blinked at them like they were memory made flesh. "You come to settle something?" he asked, voice rough with sleep. Brielle held Xander's hand, not for comfort, but because it felt right. "We'd like to be married." The Reverend stepped back without a word and let them in. The sitting room smelled of lamp oil and dried apples. A Bible sat open on the lace-covered table. He asked no more questions, only looked between them with a quiet nod and reached for his coat. By the time they stood beneath the bare rafters of the small chapel behind the house, the sun had risen enough to throw pale light through the dusty panes. The wind outside stirred the trees. Brielle's hands were warm in Xander's, her eyes steady as the Reverend's voice rose and fell, binding them with words older than the mountains around them. When it was done, Xander leaned down and kissed her, gentle but sure, and she kissed him back with nothing held back. They rode home without hurry. The courthouse visit came 3 days later. Reverend Cal accompanied them, his signature already dry on the sworn witness statement. The clerk barely looked up this time, just took the documents, stamped them, and filed them into a drawer. By the time they left town, snow had started to fall. It took 2 days to walk the fence line and mark each post with fresh paint, a red mineral compound mixed with linseed oil. Xander carried the tin while Brielle marked the wood, each stroke a declaration. They didn't speak much as they worked, but when they stopped for water near the spring, she turned to him, brushing a flake of snow from his collar. "He'll still try," she said. Xander didn't hesitate. "Let him." But Garvey Holt didn't ride up with guns or threats. Instead, 2 weeks later, he sent a man to the house with a folded letter and a tight jaw. Brielle read it by the stove, her face unreadable. "He's selling," she said, "to a man out of Wyoming. Said he's tired of this valley and its stubborn claims." Xander leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "You believe him." "I do," she said. "He's lost the court, lost the land. There's nothing left for him to press." He watched her for a moment. "How do you feel?" She folded the letter again. "Like something's been set down that I didn't know I was carrying." That night they sat on the porch wrapped in a wool blanket, sharing the last of the cider she'd put by in September. Snow dusted the steps. The barn was quiet, the horses fed and bedded. "What will we do now?" she asked. "Whatever you want," he said. "I want to finish the roof on the north side of the barn. Plant corn sooner this year. Maybe add another room to the house," he nodded. "We'll need more hands in spring. I'll ask the Duncan boys. They're good with a team." He took her hand and kissed the back of it. "And after that," she smiled. "After that, I'd like a quilt big enough for two, with red in it, the bright kind. Then I'll find you the cloth." They didn't speak of what had come before. Not the tree, not the bruises, not the fear that had hung over the land like dust. It had passed, and some things didn't need remembering to be honored. The seasons moved. Snow melted into mud, then green. The house grew warmer, the barn stronger. Letters came from far-off places with offers to buy or trade, but Brielle answered none. Her land was no longer just inheritance. It was hers, theirs. One morning, she stood in the kitchen with her hands covered in flour, and Xander came in from the barn, face wind-chapped, holding a carved wooden hoop with a small copper bell tied at the center. "What's that for?" she asked. "For the porch," he said. "So you'll hear me coming when the wind's too loud." She tilted her head. "I always know when you're near." He hung it anyway, and she didn't stop him. Years passed. The fence held. The spring stayed clean. They planted corn, oats, squash, and beans. They added a room with high windows and a red quilt folded at the foot of the bed. He built her a chair with arms wide enough to rest her sewing frame, and she stitched his initials into his work shirt where the collar frayed. They never spoke much about love. They didn't need to. It was in the way he warmed her boots by the stove before winter chores. In how she set aside the first jar of preserves for him every summer. In the silence they shared by the fire, and the way their hands found each other without looking. She once asked him if he missed the road. He said only this: "There's nowhere I'd rather be than where you are." And neither of them ever left. The house stood, seasons folded around it. A place made not from stone or timber, but from two lives laid side by side, one day at a time. And in that house, in that quiet valley, love lived long and warm and true.